Some Africans don't think that they can lift their heads up to look at someone of superiority. And a lecturer might see that as timid, but rather it's just culture.
I think it was important for me that Africa, especially the countries of students, given the same opportunity to defend itself as other, because sometimes I think it can be very quick to say, oh, that country is doing something, I want to write it off, I don't want to work with them, without realizing that there are other countries across Europe, even in America, that have similar issues, and you're not quick to write them off.
Color is relative, depending on how you look at it. It's an advantage if you look at it. Because if you think about, say, Africans are very, there's a word for it, we're very sentimental.
This is Time Africa Podcast. The new sound of international education in Africa. Hello and welcome to Tide Africa Podcast. This is where we talk about everything that has to do with international education in the continent of Africa. My name is Louis Adekola and it's such a delight to welcome you to this episode. I am very excited about this one because we're talking about something very exciting, very important and very crucial in the international education ecosystem. Because very importantly, the way there's an increase and constant desire for young people to seek international education in their quest to becoming global citizen. It is very important to understand how this works in the context of how they experience the education that they get, and of course how that is relevant to the future that they're trying to build for themselves. So beyond the experience and choosing universities, choosing the courses they want to go for, and actually choosing the country, it is very important to delve into that intricate discussion around equality and diversity. Today on the podcast, we will be talking about how inclusive is international education. That is a very interesting question that we will attempt to answer in this episode today. And today, I am joined by two amazing guests who come with a lot of experience in the sector, but also been graduates from foreign institutions and as African students. During their time anyway. So I am joined today by two great people. Like I said, to my right is Kaozara Oyalowo, and she is the former policy officer for Africa and the Middle East at Universities UK International, UUKI. And the second guest that I have today is Simisola Smith. Yes. And she is the Associate Director for Africa? At Sub-Saharan Africa at Grok Global. Welcome, Kaozara, and welcome, Simisola.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. How do you feel being here?
Nervous? A bit nervous, but I'm also excited to share my insights and what I know of, education, international education.
Great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And Simisola, how do you feel?
I'm very excited.
Okay.
I am looking forward to the conversation. Speaking to Kaozara, whose name I love, by the way.
Thank you.
And of course you as well. And you are mirroring me in some ways.
You're welcome.
Yes. So yes, I am very excited.
Okay, great. I'm really looking forward to a very great conversation because, sometimes, when we want to start or when people want to choose universities, they are always asking questions of how comfortable am I going to be? How welcoming is the country? How international or diverse is the campus? All those questions, begs a lot of answers, and sometimes you think about the experience that people have and then you're wondering, is this the best of it or is this, are they taking the most advantage of that? And I think that it's very interesting conversation that we'll have today. I'm so delighted to have you both here. So let's start with a little let's start with a little chat about your journey. But before we go into the journey of you in international education, you work in international education. In fact, let's start with a little introduction of yourself in the sector. And then we'll come back to that other question because I just did a surface level introduction. A little more now.
Sure. So I graduated from the University of Leeds with Arabic and International Business. And when I finished, I didn't really know what I wanted to go into, but I knew I had a passion for education. But I also know I didn't want to teach kids. So I went into, and some of the skills that I'd gathered was very high education focused, because when I was at universities, I worked in accommodations, I worked in the student union, I worked in student ambassador. So I was very, very involved in my university life, and I really enjoyed that aspect. So by that point, a job came up in the city I was living in as a volunteering and mentoring coordinator. So I applied for it and I got it. And then I also did a secondment at the university supporting students in terms of harassment and hate. And then when the role came up in policy officer at Universities UK International, it was perfect. Not only because I'm African, but also because Middle East is something that I know quite a bit about. I understand the culture. So I ended up actually falling directly into that role. And it was such an enjoyable role because I got to meet so many amazing people. And I got to experience, I got to use some of my skills of great working with people, but also got to learn so much about sort of the barriers, but also the opportunities that exist in international education.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And I didn't actually know that Kaozara studied Arabic and
international business.
I did not know, but I know that your contributions when it comes to a policy in UUKI as it relates with the region, Middle East and Africa, was just really incredible. And I read a lot of the work and engagement with universities, and I'm just really amazed. And I'm grateful that we did have you in such a role to speak that language and to be our voice, and coordinating things.
Yeah, I was really excited. The last work I did before I left was around equitable partnerships in transnational education. That work was really, really, really important to me because even at my workplace, me and my colleague, we started the first race equity network. So where we bring together staff of color. And it's really, really important to me just because I think we actually spoke to colleagues across Africa. It wasn't just, colleagues in the UK. We spoke to colleagues across Africa on how we can have equitable partnership in transnational education. So thank you so much.
That is so brilliant.
So good. I love it.
When I come back again to this world, I want to be as sound and brilliant as you are.
She's so good. I love it. So good.
All right, let me come to another very brilliant friend of mine that I have been privileged to be sitting with today, Simisola Smith. Miss Smith.
How you say the Smith?
Yeah, I like when you introduce yourself and you're like, my name is Simisola Smith.
She's going to be conscious of that now.
Yeah, she knows. She knows what
Smith.
she's doing. And then someone says, and then she goes on to speak Yoruba sometimes, and then the person says, are you Yoruba? And then she's like,
yes.
But I just introduced myself as
They're
Simisola.
not thinking about
They're
that
not thinking
one,
about
no.
the Simisola. It's the
miss that.
Smith that works. So Miss
Yeah.
Smith.
Yeah. Or maybe they're blinded by all the colors, I think.
I love
Just
that.
too much.
Exactly.
Extra.
We will talk about that one later, maybe if we have some time. But so tell us about yourself, Simisola.
Okay, so I'm Simisola Smith. I am currently the Associate Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at GROC Global Services. Wow. So my journey in international education, started off as a student. Some people don't know this. A lot of people don't know this. I am a dropout medical school student. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, now you know. Hopefully I haven't disappointed my parents. I don't think I have. I think
No,
I think I turned out okay.
No.
Not too shabby.
Not
too shabby,
No,
right?
not shabby at all.
Right. And I think, when we talk about international education, we're talking about the big guns, the UK, US, Canada, and Australia. But I was in medical school for 1 year in Czech Republic.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just 16.
Wow.
So I left because I was doing well in school, but it was culture shock. And I think this is one of the things we're going to be talking about
Yes.
today, inclusion. Because we find that the big countries have it, most of the institutions have it together because they're used to recruiting students from international destinations. But definitely during my time, that wasn't really the case. I'll say medical schools in Czech Republic were not very aware of what needed to be on ground. But I'm thankful for the journey. The hope was to return back to medical school. But life happened, and I am in international recruitment, which I love, love, love. So I went back to the UK and studied at King's College London. So I did my degree in biomedical sciences. And that is where I got introduced to international education. Kaozara talked about being involved in the union. I was as well, as a student ambassador, became vice president academic affairs at the KCLSU, and it was the first time they had an international student. So it was exciting working with the international marketing team at the time. And, I said, I'll take a break before I go back to medical school. But the rest is history. So that break is now 12 years plus in the sector. So in between that, rather than actually got a scholarship to go back to medical school with Lagos State government. Because, we do have amazing... I'm from Lagos State. And, when we talk about bureaucracies, people said, oh, do you know? Who do you know? You must know someone. And I remember my mom calling me at the time when I was working at the University of Sunderland London campus, and she gave me a call that she just got the letter from Lagos State that I had gotten my scholarship to go to medical school. I changed that route, and I said I wanted to do my master's in education. And God bless Governor Fashola. It was during his time, and they was given this direction for them to switch it to education. So I have a pending PhD, apparently, that I owe Lagos State, but we'll get to that. But I went back to UCL to do my master's in education and international health education. So, my journey has been interesting. Every journey has its stories. I think, speaking to Kaozara before coming in, you never really know where the paths will take you. But I'm very grateful for it. Worked with a number of amazing brands. We call it brands. Marketing, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Sales and marketing. But, institutions, right, from Lancaster University, do very short, but King's College London, with my alma mater as well. Most recently, before joining Grok, with the Berlin School of Business and Innovation, where, I was there for five years. And I would say that was a big transition in my career. Because when I was leaving to Germany, a lot of people were like, why are you leaving the UK? I got a bit of resistance from external forces. But I would say my time at the Berlin School of Business is what really shaped me to take on my role at Grok, leading a team, expanding on that tentacles, going outside my comfort zone, bearing in mind that I always worked with UK institutions, right? So thinking outside the box for Germany, but I'm very grateful for the growth, and hopefully we can touch on, some more intricate details as we go along.
Thank you very much. First is when you mentioned that you have a pending PhD, I was just imagining you doing your PhD, and it's very nice.
I may not, I don't know.
But I'm just But I'm also very I'm also very delighted to hear your story, because you were an ambassador, Kaozara, but you also worked in with people of color, and you represented even as a student, and then that is led into the work that you do, even on till now, and of course yourself, Simi, when you were talking about your journey as well, and then transitioning to Germany, within that period you became the go-to person.
Absolutely.
When it comes to Germany, student recruitment, I can't even think of anybody else. Even now that you've moved away from...
Still message me. Ask me questions.
I can't even think of anybody else that would ask questions about Germany recruitment and stuff like that. And I think that's the thing about wherever you find yourself, making sure that your impact is felt. As a person, I wanted to say as a black person or as a person of color, but I would say as a person, because ultimately that's just a color, right? It doesn't really define us.
Absolutely.
So, and I think you've done that amazingly. So thank you for doing that introduction. My journey is not very fancy.
7 scholar, feel good.
Fancy just to prepare us to be fancy.
My global advisor on, say coming up next month.
Right?
Not saying that. Come on.
Well,
Tide.
Okay. Well, Tyne is great. Tyne,
Don't let me go into everything. Advantage, coming into the King's project.
Wow.
Workshop.
Do you know, like, when you have your guest on
God,
the
she
podcast,
gives.
you saw that question.
You. I know you.
I'm supposed to be the one investigating, like, getting the research done before this episode. It's just like, I read about you. I should know you, but I found out more.
And all about fashion, Godfather, everything.
He didn't win an award as well when Richard got them down.
He did. He did.
Okay, so moving on. Wait, didn't he win that award? And humility in my head, I'm like, which of the awards? But anyway,
You can be humble, it's fine.
I know, yeah.
To the audience,
yeah.
not to us.
Okay, but I think it's also great to acknowledge the journey that we've had, and you know how the accolades also come in, and you know what we've achieved, because sometimes we downplay the work that we do and the impact that we consistently make. And then we rob other people the opportunity of learning from us and getting inspired by us. And I think sometimes, you know, before, when I was much younger, I used to be like, I don't want to be a proud person. I don't want to be considered as proud. But like right now, I like pride. As long as it's controlled and well managed.
Celebrate yourself.
Yeah, because that's when you actually can tell yourself that I have the capacity to do even so much more, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about your university experience. And I think I want us to use that as a basis or foundation for this conversation. How would you describe your experience as a person of color when you were studying? Let me start with you, Simi.
Interesting. I guess color is relative.
Yeah.
You know, depending on how you look at it. I guess I remember I was on a cab back home with a staff of the Students' Union one night. And, you know, at the time I'd just won, you know, being vice president of the Students' Union at KCLSU. I think I was getting calls and, you know, probably my mom was being overly dramatic. Oh my God, I would been praying over none of Mama Smith, by the way. I love her. You know, so dramatic, and maybe it was on speaker. And you know, over there, it's just seen as, it's just a union now. What's happening? And she asked me a question. She was like, what's the buzz? Are you some sort of a celebrity in your home? I said, no. It's basically because, you know, this sort of things are not really, you know, actually, I would not have run for union anything, no, if I was studying local. I don't have energy. I'm sorry. Kudos to
Luther, Kotunua, Victoria, Asa.
you know, and, you know, it was amazing. I guess it's an advantage if you look at it.
Yeah.
Because I would say being Black, being African, being international, I was competing with 3 other people who were from the same race.
Yeah.
So those votes are potentially properly split in some ways. Right? So if you think about it, Africans are very, there's a word for it. We're very outspoken, but not
Passionate.
It's not passionate. It's not biased. It's because you're Black, I'm definitely voting for you. I don't know what you do, but I'll vote for you. Sentimental.
Yeah,
we are very sensitive. Especially Nigeria.
I love it when we'll come back to that. But I love it when you're in the UK or anywhere else in the world, and you're working in the street of London, and you see a Black person.
Yeah.
And there's this nod, like you have to do this.
Yeah, there was. Yes. You know what's even funny? I was walking in my hometown. Anyways, I saw this Black woman with her kids. She just did like a little run. Me too, I started running. And then we looked at each other. We're like, I was like, if I see another Black person running, I'm running. Because we don't.
Exactly.
You know, like that. Like, you just have a leg with each other. Yeah. I don't know why she was running, but I was like, she just did a little run to the side. Me too, I ran to, and we just started laughing at each other. And I don't ask questions.
Yeah.
So he's definitely like that.
Yeah, so right.
You know, so, you know, it for me was let me say I used it to my advantage. I saw the positive in it. Of course, you know, politics will be politics. It's not like I did not face because some people can be very political. Student thing, you know. I was just going there, young Black girl from Nigeria, let me do me. At the same time, I was being scrutinized. Probably the first time that, you know, I was probably torn into a million pieces and I had to come back to it. Because then I was championing rights of BME students, right? I was pushing for, because, you know, in terms of the 4 leaders, you know, they have made up what is the percentage rate, 75% of the leadership. And I was the only black person on the team,
Yeah.
which meant that anything I was doing, probably 25% of the 4. Do you understand? So they were doing whatever they were doing, and I was doing other things as well. But I needed to do more. You know, I'll be in meetings and I'll be thinking about how does this apply to your typical international student?
Yeah.
How does this apply to your typical student from Africa? How do they feel? How are we being more representative? And I'm very proud to say that after my time at KCLSU, a number of international students, not just from Africa, had the courage to run from Asia, from parts of Europe, because they felt like, okay, so anybody
That jinx has been broken at that
the
point.
jinx, absolutely. And it's beautiful to see future union leaders at KCLSU, you know, evolving, coming from different races, different continents. Because the aim was not just to put Africa on the map, but to actually make every student feel like KCLSU was for them. Do you understand? So to your question, Louis, for me, I use that as my advantage.
Great.
Of course, there are times that I try not to assume that certain things that may be happening to me was because of the color of my skin. It helped me to move past obstacles.
Yeah.
And that could have been a job rejection. That could have been any other thing. Do you understand that, okay, I'm a minority, so maybe not the number one. It helps. It helps not to think that way. It helps you to progress and it helps you to unlock opportunities.
Great.
So yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think I wanted to jump straight to one question that is like in my heart.
Yeah.
But I don't want to miss, Kaozara also sharing our experience as an international student at Leeds, and everywhere else. But just share with us, maybe briefly, but like your experience as an international student.
I'll actually be guilty. I was a home student.
You were, yeah, but of course, you were you were a home student, okay.
But I would say that before I went to uni, I was so excited to go to uni because I'd taken a gap year before I went. So at that point, all my friends were going off to uni and I was feeling like sad and everything. So I was quite independent and I was really excited to experience a new world. And just because before that, I went to a predominantly white school, I didn't really have a lot of black friends. So it was really important for me that at universities that I made friends with black people. And I remember I'm still friends with the girl up till today, actually, when I first arrived at university. I remember there was a house party and everyone was going. I'd never been to a house party before. I was like, oh my God, what's happening? So I sent her a message saying, can I come with you? She was like, okay, sure. And we're still friends to this day.
Oh, bless.
But it was so important for me to go because I felt like it was so important for me to be around that environment because there was so much about myself that I did not know as a black person. Like even things around hair, like obviously I knew I grew up with, but even like just meeting a group of friends, the best makeup, the best hair, they had that kind of sisterhood around each other that was always so beautiful that I felt like I was just missing half the time. And I felt like the most comfortable when I'm around black women most of the time. So it was just so important for me to go. And I didn't really let color be an issue for me. I did whatever I wanted to do. I joined society. I was part of the poetry society. That was a mixed bag of people of color. It was always a safe space for everyone that was marginalized. So I met so many interesting people. I took up jobs. I worked in the university. I think one thing that I would always say in terms of people of color is that take advantage, like don't sit in your dorm expecting opportunities to come to you. Like even just being a president of a society or being part of this committee, it's enough of an experience. It gives you the confidence to go on and do stuff. If there's jobs to do to earn over the summer, universities don't really discriminate when it comes to working as a student within their own campus. So take advantage of that. Like don't say like mingle, network, enjoy. Like the good thing I think I say about UK universities, it's not just about the degree. It's about the other aspect of it. And so that's what makes it good. That's why people leave home. Because if it was just education, we'll all be just online. But I feel like it's a safe bubble for you to explore the things you want to do. And then once that bubble bursts, it's it. But in that moment, you can do so many different things and try so many different things and still feel carried, still feel like, there's still so much to do. So I would say, for me, it was really important just because of my background and where I was coming from. However, getting to university, I met so many different people from all walks of life, but it was also so important for me having that community of black people to be around and people of color as well, because it was something I was always so deprived of. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I absolutely just have enjoyed listening to both of you share that experience, because sometimes, when we go on work trips and we meet with students that are interested in studying, sometimes we don't have that enough time to hear, their expectations. And sometimes we don't even have enough time to also share the story of, people that have studied with us, or even our journeys as well. And just like you both have shared, I had the honor of like working in a particular NGO when I was studying BMACP, Black Minority Ethnicity Community Partnership. What a mouthful.
Well done.
So yeah, I was there, and I just really learned that there was a lot that people deal with, when they resume on campus or when they are living in the cities where they live in. And, those kind of involvement, those kind of parties and colleagues and friends and networks can really play an important role in helping one settle in and have a great experience. Talking about experiences, right? My next question is just very straightforward. How inclusive is the international education sector for African students? Can we start with you, Kaozara?
Sure. I would say that it's pretty inclusive, but it could be better. Yeah. That is always my experience of it. And I think, especially when you saw the boom, I can speak from the UK perspective, especially when you saw the boom of Nigerian students coming in the last couple of years, you can see that universities are then trying to, especially when they have the budget for it, trying to create departments of student experience, because they know that student experience is super important in how, like, the word of mouth. So it actually benefits them a lot to have, to be inclusive, to understand the international student experience, whatever that may look like, because different cities will have different things. Smaller cities will struggle a lot more than the bigger cities because there's a lot more going on. So which means the smaller city then have to rely maybe on their own university community to make sure that they're coming through for international students.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of inclusivity, I think they're trying to get it right, but it could be so much better.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Okay.
In terms of trying to listen to their students as well, what might be best for them. And I also think it's also putting into consideration that it's a different world. That there's a culture shock. So being patient and being compassionate towards students, because they're having to come to a different culture, having to learn how to conduct themselves in that culture, is not always easy.
Yeah.
So I think as the years go by, would they see more international students, particularly African countries, there'll be a lot more resources dedicated. There's already resources, but there'll be a lot more dedicated resources to understanding the international experience for students.
Thank you very much. That's really brilliant. And I'm going to tweak that question just a little slightly for you, Simi, because you've either worked in an institution or working with institutions in your current role. What do you think that institutions are already doing to improve the inclusive nature, or to improve inclusivity in their operations, and what more can they do?
Like what Kaozara said, institutions have actually improved over time. I'll say how it was for me as an international student, very different now in terms of dynamics. Even for my older siblings who went to university, probably in the 90s, early 2000s, where relating with someone you can identify with is one thing. So even having in-country representation is actually special. So you're speaking to someone who maybe have been an international student, even if they haven't, they have a lot of experience in policy, knowledge in admissions, and, speaking to an agent. So a lot of institutions have expanded their tentacles. You talk about the big countries, UK, US, Canada, but even more so, we're seeing a lot of trends coming in Europe. France, Australia as well, France, Malta, places like that. And you're seeing them tweaking their international strategy. You're seeing international, institutions working on marketing materials. I know for certain countries, if it's in a certain language, it speaks more to the audience, right? Yeah. Typically, yes, in sub-Saharan Africa, English is the basic. But some places in Africa, Portuguese is spoken, Arabic is spoken, and, so on and so forth. So the student's journey from start to finish, even to the end, is being mapped out in such a way that they're learning and improving on those things. So the student journey, if that's local, you're meeting with agents, you're meeting with the in-country staff, Then arriving on campus, you're talking about orientation and freshers week. You know, things that we may take for granted, but how important that is. You're exposing that student to the opportunity already, the student union, the activity. Afro-Caribbean societies seeing a lot of African students whilst in school, Nigerian societies, and so on and so forth. Even up to the curriculum, it would amaze you that, you know, studying locally and going there and changing your mind. Plagiarism was a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you understand? Being taught that you cannot just copy and paste, you know, absolutely. And this is how, you know, we are very smart in the region, but we are actually quite poured into, rather than, you know, you're moving abroad and you're like, you're allowed to do what you want to do. No one is monitoring you, your curriculum, you know, this and that. And even with how faculty members engage. Right. You see a lot of institutions pouring on CPD, so continuous professional development, because you know, you're dealing with a mature nursing student who has 4 kids. That dynamic. You know, the approach of SAMA and how it works. The culture in terms of, this is how we approach things. Africans are very close-knit. When we meet, we're like, we've known each other for many years. But over there's a bit of, you know, it's a bit of pushback, but in a respectable way. That space. So when you see your typical Nigerian student saying, Prof, I want to, you know, she's turning back and saying, call me Alice.
Yes. My teacher used to sign up like that, like,
please,
just sign off with, you know, and she has like so many, you know, she's a professor as well. So many titles, and she'll literally just sign off. And I mean, we still call her doctor or professor. By an email or something. I remember I had one teacher so smart, like the head of department, jeans and like chain. Will come to class, jeans and chain, and his latest like literally trainers, rings. And you think, is this a professor? But he's so smart, but you don't try nonsense with him. But at the same time, you know that he's very like you know,
cool,
easy, easy.
But we find that like a typical young African or someone who hasn't traveled for studies at least will find that very strange. But just understanding that dynamic. Even just some Africans don't think that they can lift their heads up to look at someone of superiority. And a lecturer might see that as timid. But rather it's just culture and a sign of respect. But I know that things are changing. Of course, we're coming into a generation that, you know, imagine sending my son to school. It's probably a different mindset I'll have. When my mom sent me to school, she had a different, you know, the things are changing. We're adapting to this change. I think the key thing is smaller study destinations have a lot to learn. You know, going back to my point of I left Czech Republic because even though I was doing well academically, socially was zero. Like I struggled socially.
And that's important.
It was a scary time for me. Right? I could go back now because, you know, I'm more independent. I'm probably more social. If you don't want to be my friend, I'll be yours by force. Force myself on you. But I was young. I was 16. I mean, you know, so like I said, there are more things to be improved on. And the onus is not just on the institution, it's also on individuals. Students who are going need to feel encouraged as well. You know, Louis do quite, you know, important work with Sussex. So when you're speaking to the students, some need to be told that it's not about you being rude or anything. Do you understand? But it's really just that dynamic. It's okay for you to be calm. It's okay for you to, do you understand? So there's more to be improved on. Like Kaozara said, we have to get into the mechanism of feedback is important. We're hearing from the students, and that's not just, writing something, but even studying the trends, enrollment trends. What do they do after graduation? The careers office, the international office, academic tutorship, personal tutorship. That helped me as an international student. I feel like a lot of UK institutions have that. I don't know about other countries, but having a one-to-one tutor, the chaplaincy.
The chaplaincy was great. It was great.
Right. Not all institutions may have that.
But we had in my university a very neutral space. So it's called the meeting house. And it's a very neutral space where, you know, you can have religious activities and then you can have the chaplaincy is there as well. And apart from that, I found it very interesting because anytime there is a strike, in the country, it's a neutral space where lectures can still go on, and most of the personal tutorials and like you mentioned happens there as well. And I think it's a very great thing for institutions to have.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about institutions and all of that, and I want to take it a little eye up as we begin to close up on this conversation. A little eye up. You've talked a lot about, you know, the experiences that students have on campus, and also, Simi, you were talking about all the different things when you mentioned a woman that is older, studying nursing, and sometimes you even have admission for people who are mature students. They don't have to go through the same route with someone coming from maybe sixth form college or secondary school and all that. How do you think that institutions, and again, this is tying back to the lots of policy changes that we constantly see in the sector, right? How do you think that now a bit of institutions and governments can also step in addressing whatever imbalance exists? And if you want to mention maybe one or two imbalance that exist in the international education ecosystem, maybe I see that chocolate.
Well, I want to get cancelled.
Yeah. So, but this, as much as we can. But the whatever imbalance, and how do you think the government can step in ensuring that, especially when it comes to all these intersectionalities, you know, with women and gender and orientation and all of these other things that happens. So I'll let you take that, Kaozara. I know it's so very, but
I think when I think of, in my own experience of the imbalance, I think for me it's, I want to say mainly that, so when I was doing policy work and stuff like that, I think it was important for me that Africa, especially the countries of students, or, you know, when they're working with institutions, was given the same opportunities as other countries, or given the same opportunity to defend itself as other, because sometimes I think it can be very quick to say, oh, that country is doing something, I want to write it off, I don't want to work with them, without realizing that there are other countries across Europe, even in America, that have similar issues, and you're not quick to write them off.
Yeah.
But when it comes to African countries, when it comes to those kind of space, you want to quickly, and I think it's a lack of education. And it's not something I want to say necessarily, but I think it's a lack of understanding, actually, of the different issues that exist within those countries. It's also trying not to like say, oh, you know, that country is beyond redeemable. They have these laws, okay, bye. We don't want to work with them. But rather seeing that your government is not always your people. You know what I mean? Like the government could, even in the UK, the government have one set of law, but then when you meet people, it might be a completely different thing. So when you start to write off a group, when you start to write off a country, you miss so many opportunities. So for me, I think there's an imbalance in the lack of education and understanding that the issues that exist within Africa, you need to have dialogue with people to understand that if you're serious about building strategic partnerships that are long-term, it's not just about building partnership that are short-term or thinking about the money. Because in the long run, look at with COVID, it could be that partnership ends, or a partner feels that they're not being best represented, or the things that they need, you're not coming forward to it as a partner. You're just deciding this is how we want it to work. So I think for me, specifically, I think government could do better in terms of, I think less so government, but more people to people, more institution to institution, having those important conversations and moving forward the action. It's not just having the conversation, let's forget about it. Having those conversations and having an agreed set of action. That's whether, you know, even the fact that we do work away trips to the UK, like people are really, how about those lecturers also come to the UK and come to Nigeria and see how they work, because they it's not just one country has skills and another country doesn't. They both have something to be taken away. So I think for me, it's the idea of just having more compassion for people, having more compassion for the circumstances that led to whatever someone's going through, whether in the UK, whether in Nigeria. And just being able to come down to people's level and just realize that, you know, there's so much more to what people are really passionate. You can't meet one person that doesn't say education is important. So rather than just stick to that kind of governmental, or this is the law of that country, we don't want to work with them. Think about the individuals as individuals rather than as a collective. Because I think in UK, they can exist as an individual whilst they see Africans as a collective, and therefore this is how they're like, this is how the country's like, this is how the people's like.
I mean, this has just been such an amazing conversation, and I've really had such a great time from your experiences in the SU. And I love looking at, like, if you look at Simi online, if you check her out online, you will see all these things there. I'm like, how does she have this energy? Like, and it reflects even now, yeah, right? And I'm just really happy that we've had this opportunity to talk about all of these things, but also beyond, our stories, but also how it impacts the work, the policies. We've talked about, like government policies and stuff. Now, so I want to quickly ask one question, right? Question around when institutions or like colleagues look at the industry, the first thing they think about is that it's a late market, is this and that. What would you say is one thing that stands the industry in Africa out, the international education recruitment in Africa? What is one thing that you think stands us out against other markets?
It's hard to say one thing, though, Louis. I think there are multiple facets.
Yes.
I think the most popular one, and I think most international recruiters know this, is the youth bulge across the continent. And not only the fact that it's young people, it's the fact that these young people are hungry for an international global experience.
Exactly.
Do you understand?
Exactly.
So, and they're also looking for opportunities that will afford them the right return on the investment.
Yeah.
So that's why, international education and that inclusion topic is shifting around the big markets to what the other smaller, more affordable markets can do. But I know that, yes, recruiters or institutions say, okay, Nigeria is a late market. We have some of our complexities. We have the currency devaluation that's currently happening. But there are also, because I know we're speaking from Lagos, from Nigeria, and we can quickly forget that sub-Saharan is huge, right? You're talking about your Ghana, your Kenya, your South Africa, your Tanzania, your East African markets, and so on and so forth. Ghana, for instance, houses majority of international schools.
Yeah.
That is a unique proposition.
Absolutely.
Right, for any institution. And Ghana, and I'm sure you can, identify with this, Louis, is a less bureaucratic market than Nigeria in terms of market penetration.
Yeah.
So I believe, with Nigeria, it's a bit of a political landscape. The more people it's easier to access certain infrastructure, certain institutions. But Ghanaians are more open to those opportunities. And because it's a less tapped market, they're more interested. So those are the uniquenesses, for instance.
Yeah.
I think Ghana houses over about 114 international schools. And out of those 114 international schools, over 37,000 students get placed in the US, UK, and Canada.
Yeah.
That is huge opportunities there. So I guess institutions should shift their mindset from the late market mindset, the complexity, price-sensitive market, and, begin to expand. Institutions are building international strategies around diversification within Africa because Nigeria has been overflogged to a certain extent. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So now institutions are now talking about, okay, how can we get more Kenyan students into the room?
Yeah.
How can we get, and there's a lot of responsibility on the institutions. You're talking about scholarship schemes that will specifically target these students. Over time, a lot of, institutions, even when you have scholarships in Africa, it's typically been Nigerians or we want Nigeria. But a lot of institutions are changing that mindset. And this is what makes the sub-Saharan very unique. Unique also because of our political instability, because the continent is not as stable. Of course, there are more stable economies.
And again, the impact that political factors
of course
have on the work that we do.
Oh, absolutely. So these things make us unique in certain ways, in the sense that it's not a market that will dry up soon. Because the youth would always want to look for
Constantly growing.
growing.
The youth population is constantly growing as well.
and moving out, or looking for opportunities to move out and thrive.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And that's a very brilliant way that ties back to what you said. I mean, I love how you created that analysis of Nigeria to Ghana to Kenya, which also ties back to what Kaozara was just saying about, the viewpoint, looking at Africa as a whole, and sometimes it takes looking closely to see how these markets, differ. What you would like, your proposition in a place like Nigeria would be different from a place like Ghana and of that. And I just want to quickly ask this question, Kaozara, because of your experience working as a policy officer and, in all these different areas that involve, speaking and interacting with people from different parts, what is that lesson that you've learned that you think that colleagues within the industry can learn from in your years or like in your period of working in this area, in this sector?
I think not one size fits all.
Yeah.
Which is always the assumption that, and I think it's historic as well. When you hear people speak on social media, it's very much Africa rather than, Nigeria, or very much like Kenya. So there's this assumption that one size fits all. So therefore, the way we approach Nigeria is the way we're going to approach South Africa, and the way we approach South Africa is the way we're going to approach Angola, for example, and also language as well. I know, like, there's also UK doesn't really as much touch Francophone Africa as much as other. Yes, exactly. So I think it's just being mindful and trying to understand the actual country's regulatory environment, trying to understand the policies that exist within those countries and how they impact, and also understanding the national objectives, because that's one thing I say to people. Sometimes when maybe organizations in Africa or even universities contact me, we want to work with this, we want to work with that. Have you done your research into who you want to work with? Does their curriculum match with your curriculum, like in terms of what you're trying to offer? Because at the end of the day, you're not trying to offer something new, and you're just trying to find a way to what both of you have to merge it in a way that works for the students that you have in country and for the students you want to work with outside of those countries. So it's about having those conversations, understanding what those countries, what their policies are, what their aims are, what their strategies are, what is the issues that's affecting them in these current issues, because we have issues around climate and, especially when we talk about development and things like that,
We're just talking about development and
exactly.
modernity.
Capacity building.
Of course.
And, and also I think one of the biggest thing is empowering African institutions to take ownership of what they want to learn. And I think a lot more of that is happening, but not always relying on institutes to tell you this is, some of them just want that curriculum and go. However, it's so important, like the localization, even local languages, what's the point of doing research when it doesn't, when the local population doesn't speak the language that the research is in. So how can we localize in order to benefit? So I think those are the kind of important conversation that needs to be had between both parties when they decide that, we want to work together or we're planning to come to this country. Because one thing I can tell you is that sometimes Africans will always do their research into the countries they're going into. So I think it's also important that the countries don't just rely on what they think they know from their lit review, but actually talking to the people that it genuinely affects, or the people down on the ground.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think that's really spot on about, just knowing that no one size fits all, and context will always play an important role in decisions, in the tastes of people and desire. It could just be an information passed on from one person to another, or the concept that people, or the viewpoints that people in a certain region have about certain places. But you've talked a lot about African institution, and I would just want to ask this final question, Simi. And this question really is one that I find very interesting, and I think is a very important one to ask. We've talked about inclusion. We've talked about how inclusive our international institutions or African students. But my question now is, how inclusive, or how can African institutions make their institutions, or African countries or African institutions make these institutions even more inclusive for Africans, whether they are coming from other countries across Africa or coming from around the world?
That's a very good question. I think this is also part related to also splitting the sub-Saharan into geographies.
Yes.
I think certain sub-regions, as we call them, are already doing good,
Yeah.
right? Let's take Southern Africa, for instance. Institutions in Southern Africa, I think, are quite internationalized,
Yeah.
in my
Very.
opinion.
I agree.
I do know that there is a huge migration from Zimbabwe to South Africa,
Yeah.
from Eastern Africa to South Africa. South Africa is becoming the international hub of the sub-Saharan. And not only have they nailed that aspect of being more appealing. So if you, I wouldn't use the word if you can't go to the big cities, but because it is quite competitive.
Yeah.
Even more competitive to
Yeah.
get into some South African
Yeah.
institutions
Exactly.
than even some UK institutions.
Yeah.
Of course, this is the podcast is not to mention names or all that because I don't have their data, but it is because some institutions in South Africa are known for specific stuff, architecture, engineering, different things. So I feel like in the region we could learn from ourselves, right? And using South Africa as that case
Yeah.
study. Exchange programs are something that has always happened
Yeah.
years on year. And and we're seeing more, we do have local academics who go abroad, but we're not seeing overseas colleagues coming
Yeah.
as well to study setting programs, setting courses. I know that, study abroad helps, but how much of those affiliations are happening. I think a number of institutions are getting it correctly. A number of institutions want to tap into
Yeah.
it. And Africa is no longer being seen as, what's the word? As, brain drain, for instance. There's that brain drain conversation where
Yeah.
a lot of our good people are going. But locally, I'm seeing that energy, right, of overseas institutions even wanting to empower
Yeah.
local institutions.
Or vice versa, because I mean, at the end of the day, the knowledge sharing is both
Absolutely.
ways.
Absolutely.
Universities, when they come here and collaborate with African institution,
Yeah.
is also like it's a win-win.
It's a
If
win-win.
the conversation goes well,
Yes.
you probably know this a
Yes.
lot more than any of us because of your
course.
TNE engagement and
What can we
expectation.
learn?
How can we
Absolutely.
learn? How can we exchange knowledge? And
Yeah.
I think this is one thing that we have to do so much more.
Absolutely.
This has just really been great. I've really enjoyed speaking with both of you. And I don't know if Kaozara or Simi just want to say one final word before we go, and just one final thing about inclusion in international education, especially as it relates to African students. Finally.
Yeah, I was going to say something about the late, Nigeria being a late market. But I think one thing to realize that Nigeria is part of the UK government's international education strategy.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they also recognize the opportunities that exist in the students.
Yeah.
I think one of the numbers that was quoted when we had a meeting with one of the ministries, this was a year or two back, but essentially they quoted that, there's 700,000 spaces for 1.3 million students. That's a huge, huge gap between the number of students who can't even get into university. So TNE is a bit more ludicrous because then they can then tap into that market of, bringing people over and things like that.
Yeah.
So when they say it's a late comer, I always find that funny because for foreign entities to now see there's an opportunity there, it means that it's not really late. It's just they're now starting to see that, okay, we can't always rely on China. We can't always rely on Europe. We can't always rely on the America. Where can we go next to diversify our income or diversify our portfolio? Okay, African countries. And I think if they can actually think about investing in policies that make sense, telling students they can come and study, but they can't bring their, they can't bring their family or their kids. So it's unfair.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily right. I understand why the policies came into place, but if you're trying to attract new talent, if you're trying to attract people into the country for universities, whatever it may be, you can't then put a barrier on how they choose to migrate. And I think, and also wanting people to stay in their countries to educate them, but the reason why sometimes people go abroad is because of that international experience.
Yeah.
So then telling them, actually, we'll bring the education to you, you stay in your country, whilst other people can be mobile, is also telling.
Yeah.
So I think, it's interesting.
There's a lot to be unpacked, you know, when you look at inclusion, to be honest, because, you know, some of these things are things that we could spend like hours and days talking about.
100%.
But I hope that we get to see it again and talk about that. So, Simi.
Well, I think we can never come to the point where everything will be perfect.
Yeah.
100%.
Policies will always be changing. We can't predict the future from now. We can use data to kind of foresee certain things and make recommendations. But I think key thing for institutions, for agents, for umbrella bodies, like with the work, you know, Tyne is doing, for instance, with, you know, the Beulah, you know, different umbrella bodies, Education USA, British Council, and so on and so forth. As the adaptability side, I think the most important thing and what will be very important in coming years is the ability of institutions to become very adaptable.
Yeah.
In their style of approach, how they're going to see things. There was a time where, you know, people would say, and even probably now, that doing TNE in the region, doing business in Nigeria is difficult, right?
Yeah.
So people would select maybe Ghana, for instance, for TNE projects in West Africa. But I'm seeing like a shift in that paradigm.
And it's also policy changes on both parties. Policy changes from Nigeria and from other countries as well. Because I know that there used to be like some policies that doesn't
allow
support those
non-indigens to do businesses here. And, you know, again, you know, you say Nigeria is very volatile, and amongst other things. But I think we're in a place, especially with the currency devaluation, where the topic on TNE is becoming very important.
Excellent.
Right, and will become more and more important over the next coming years.
Yeah.
As we see the demographic even shifting, remember that predominantly international education recruitment has always really, really been for the PGs most of the time. But that shifts.
I think diversification is one very important aspect of this work, because you're constantly thinking, what next can I do? How can I shift the market? How can I do
open
this?
to the changes.
Thank you, guys. I mean, this has just been really great, to be honest. I've just really had a great time talking to you. How do you feel about this conversation? I know it's a lot that we can still talk about, but I hope again that we can have you again on the Tyne Africa
It's been
podcast.
Good. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like I said, this is a bit of my bread and butter, and always trying to, I guess, find solutions necessarily.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do enjoy this topic, and I think there's a lot to it.
Even though I said it was not necessarily my expertise, Louis.
Yeah.
I think you give me feedback on how well I did.
Yeah. I mean, you did absolutely well. And I think, you know, there's nothing like telling one story. If you're telling your story and building on that, I mean, that really addresses a lot of things and makes all the difference.
But it's a passionate topic.
Yeah, it is.
And I think I remember telling you when you said, Simi, you're going to come on this podcast. I was like, oh my God, I was just talking to somebody about inclusion.
Yeah, exactly.
I did my master's project with, on children with special needs in Nigeria, and how I was so like, bam, 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 bam.
Yes.
So thank you so much for having me. It's nice to relieve the practical, theoretical aspects of, you know, my master's degree.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I love that we're able to finally do this. And so, yes, so there you have it. That was a very lovely, great conversation with two amazing individuals, Kaozara Oyalowo, former policy officer at Universities UK International, and of course, Simisola Smith. Miss Smith, from
Here we go.
Associate Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at GROC Global Services. And this has just been amazing, talking about inclusion and the power, the importance of inclusion and making, you know, places more adaptable or like more receptive and even more comfortable for, you know, international students studying with us. So this has been great, and I've really enjoyed speaking to them, and I hope that you have enjoyed this session as well. If you have, as we hope you have, please do take a moment to just subscribe, like, share, and comment on this podcast. And please do let us know how you feel and what kind of conversations you would like us to also have as well. Would like to listen to you, would like to hear from you, and to get your feedback and build on it. Again, this conversation is one that we cannot exhaust in one sitting, and we hope to be back with more exciting episodes as well. Till the next time when we shall be back, my name is Louis Adekola, and this has been Tyne Africa Podcast, the new sound of international education in Africa. Take care. Thank you.